They built a car so fast, even the police couldn't catch it. A family sedan that outpaced Ferraris. And when criminals started using it for high-speed robberies, the media called for it to be banned. The government panicked, and the automaker quietly killed the project. But this wasn't just a getaway car. It was a 377 horsepower statement that a car didn't need a badge to be dangerous. This is the story of the Lotus Omega, the car that went too fast and paid the price. In the late 1980s, the streets of Europe were changing. BMW had launched the M5. Mercedes was developing the 500e, with help from Porsche. Jaguar had its XJR. A new kind of vehicle was rising. One that blended executive luxury with unapologetic speed. These weren't sports cars. They were sedans. For doors, leather seats, room for a family, and power that could humiliate Ferraris on the Autobahn. General Motors wanted in, but they didn't want to follow. They wanted to dominate. At the time, GM owned Opel, a practical, reliable German automaker, known for fleet cars and taxis. Not high performance. But GM had something else in its pocket. Lotus. Lotus was a legendary British engineering firm, known for lightness, racing pedigree, and a fanatical obsession with handling. GM had acquired Lotus in 1986, mostly for bragging rights. But now, it was time to cash in. So someone asked the question, what if we took a boring Opel and made it faster than a Ferrari? The target, the Opel Omega AA midsize executive sedan, a car your boss might drive, a car that wouldn't turn heads. But underneath that anonymity was potential. The mission was outrageous. Turn a sensible family sedan into the fastest four-door car in the world. And not just fast in a straight line. It had to handle, it had to brake. It had to survive the Autobahn, the Nürburgring, and everyday commutes. It had to be civilized, yet terrifying. Lotus got to work. They didn't just tune the engine. They rebuilt the car from the inside out. The Omega's stock 3.0-liter inline-six wasn't going to cut it. So Lotus re-engineered it, increasing displacement to 3.6 liters and adding to Garrett T to 5 turbo. The result? A conservative 377 horsepower. Though insiders believe the real number was over 400. For context, the Ferrari Testarossa at the time made 385 horsepower. The Porsche 911 Turbo, around 320. And now here was a four-door Opel, with a trunk, back seats, and a radio that could outrun both. 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.2 seconds. Top speed, officially 177 miles per hour, 285 kilometers per hour, closing parenthesis, unofficially. Higher, the speedometer went to 300. Lotus didn't stop at power. They strengthened the gearbox using the same transmission from the Chevrolet Corvette, ZR1. The suspension was reworked completely. The brakes were massive, with AP racing calipers that could stop a freight train. The wheels were custom-designed 17-inch alloys, wrapped in ultra-high-performance tires, which had to be specially made by Goodyear, just to survive the speeds. The chassis was widened. The bodywork subtly flared. The paint, imperial green, a deep, almost black metallic, that shimmered dark emerald in sunlight. And then there was the badge, Lotus on the back. Not Opel, not GM, because this wasn't a rebirth. It was a rebirth. And GM wasn't just aiming for the German market. In the UK, the car was sold as the Vauxhall Lotus Carlton, and in a land known for tabloid newspapers, speed limits, and polite restraint, it was a bombshell. Was a car you could buy from a Vauxhall dealership, and outdrive every police car in the country. The British press couldn't believe it. A sedan that looked like a business executive's commuter car, but hit nearly 300 kilometers per hour. A four-door that could destroy a Ferrari. It was ridiculous. It was brilliant. It was a problem. Because, as word spread about the Lotus Omega, so did the controversy. But before we get to that, let's talk about what made this car different. Most performance sedans are evolutionary. This one was revolutionary. It wasn't developed in a boardroom. It was forged in a garage in Hithel, England, by engineers who thought the project was mad, and fell in love with it anyway. Every system was tested to its limit. Every component was stressed until it screamed. This wasn't a car built for marketing. It was built for engineering glory. And yet, from the outside, it looked calm. That was its most dangerous trick. No huge spoilers, no racing stripes, no wild styling. Just a subtle low-slung sedan that could flatten a supercar and carry groceries in automotive circles. This is called a Q car, a machine that hides its capability beneath an unassuming exterior. And the Lotus Omega was the king of Q-cars. But this story wasn't destined to stay in the garage, because soon, The wrong people started paying attention. Criminals. Organized gangs, high-speed burglars, getaway drivers, people who needed a car that could outrun anything, and looked invisible doing it. And that was the beginning of the end. But back in 1989, before the headlines, before the outrage, before the bans, there was just an idea. Let's build a car so fast it shouldn't exist, and then sell it to anyone who dares to drive it. Lotus said yes, and the world would never look at sedans the same way again. At first, the headlines were confused. A group of masked men robbed an electronics store in Bedfordshire, England. The alarm was triggered. Police were alerted. They responded in minutes. But by the time officers arrived, the robbers were already gone. Not just gone, vanished. Eyewitnesses said the car they left in was just a Vauxhall. But that couldn't be right. Vauxhalls didn't move like that. The police gave chase anyway. What followed was a high-speed pursuit on the M1 motorway. The squad cars were Ford Sierras and Rovers. Average, capable, but no match. The getaway car vanished into the night, touching speeds close to 150 miles per hour. When the footage was reviewed, the plate was identified. The car, a Vauxhall Lotus Carlton. That's when British law enforcement realized this wasn't just another fast car. This was a problem. The Lotus Carlton, or Lotus Omega on the continent, had begun to attract attention from all the wrong people. For criminals, it was perfect. No one suspected it. It could blend into traffic. It had 4 doors, enough for crew and cargo, and most importantly, nothing could catch it. Not even the police. At the time, the fastest vehicles in UK police fleets topped out at around 130 miles per hour. 177 mph. That gap was more than numbers. It was control. The criminal underworld had discovered a machine the police couldn't match, and they began using it for smash-and-grab robberies, for ATM heists, for high-speed drug runs. Soon, news outlets picked up the pattern. The getaway car police can't stop. A family sedan turned into a supercar weapon. Should this car be banned? Panic set in. In one now infamous case, a gang stole over £20,000 worth of spirits from a store in West Bromwich. CCTV caught them loading crates into the trunk. Quickly, efficiently, the engine roared. Seconds later, they were gone. Police set up roadblocks, deployed intercept. None were fast enough. Public pressure mounted. If police couldn't catch them, who could? This wasn't how GM or Lotus planned things. The Lotus Carlton was supposed to be a halo car, a statement of engineering power, but it was becoming something darker, a symbol of outlaw speed. And the British press didn't let it go. Tabloids published photos of the Carlton with sensational headlines. Too fast for the law. Ban this car. The supercar sedan that empowers crime. By 1992, members of parliament were demanding action. Why is this car legal on British roads? What kind of society allows criminals to outgun police? Of course, the car itself wasn't to blame. It had no ideology, no intent, but that didn't matter. In a world of headlines and fear, perception wins. Vauxhall issued statements. Lotus tried to distance itself, but it was too late. The Carlton had become infamous. Even petrolheads who loved the engineering were divided. Some admired it, others called it irresponsible. After all, why give that much power to anyone with a license and a bank loan? Yet others argued, isn't that the point of performance cars? To push boundaries, not conform. But in this case, the push had gone too far, too fast. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies faced a real tactical issue. There was now a street-legal vehicle capable of outrunning anything in the police garage. Their only hope, helicopters, but even then, ground pursuit was hopeless. Some departments requested special vehicles, or speed governors. But the real solution came from somewhere else entirely. The factory. Production of the Lotus Omega Carlton had already been limited, under 1,000 units total. But under growing pressure and lukewarm sales due to bad publicity, GM pulled the plug. The project ended. Quietly, cleanly. No farewell, no successor. The fastest sedan in the world had become a liability. But the damage, or the legend, was done. Ask any UK car enthusiast over 40 about the Lotus Carlton, and you'll get the same look, a knowing grin, a flash of memory. That was the car criminals loved. The one even the police couldn't catch. It wasn't just about speed. It was about power, in the wrong hands. And for once, power didn't wear a badge. It wore a Vauxhall logo that terrified the establishment. Because the Lotus Carlton proved something uncomfortable. That performance doesn't need permission. That danger can come in a suit and tie. That sometimes, the monster hides in plain sight. The Lotus Omega wasn't built for crime. but it was perfect for it. And that contradiction, that unintentional weaponization of engineering, made it more than just a car. It became a story, a whispered name in garages, a banned icon in parliament, a ghost in police reports. And just like that, the fastest sedan in the world disappeared, but not forgotten, because legends don't fade. They hide, waiting for the world to catch up. They built the fastest sedan the world had ever seen. It could outpace a Ferrari, outrun police cars, and carry 5 people with groceries in the back. It was the ultimate engineering statement. Discreet, powerful, and unshakably confident. But for all its brilliance, the Lotus Omega was already in trouble. Not because of what it lacked, but because of what it represented. It was a car that scared people, not with its look, or its sound, or its price, but with its idea that anyone, not just the wealthy, not just the connected, could walk into a showroom and buy something capable of outgunning the law. That a man in a business suit could, with one turn of the key, become faster than the entire police force. The media painted it as a menace. Lawmakers questioned its existence. The public, already caught in the anxiety of rising crime in early 90s Britain, began to believe the car was part of the problem. And in a way, it was. Not intentionally, but symbolically. Because performance, when stripped of prestige and flash, becomes unpredictable. It stops being a status object and becomes a threat. This wasn't a Lamborghini everyone could see coming. It was invisible, and that's what made it dangerous. But public opinion was only one side of the fall. The other was internal. General Motors, the corporate giant behind the project, never truly understood what Lotus had created. To GM, the Lotus Omega was supposed to be a high-performance flagship, a limited-run icon, a way to signal, we can do precision, we can do performance, we can challenge BMW. But once the headlines turned sour, GM's interest turned cold. Sales were slow, not because the car wasn't brilliant, but because it was misunderstood. It cost nearly twice as much as a standard Omega. It looked too subtle for those who wanted flash, and it was too extreme for buyers who just wanted comfort. It had no real market segment. It lived in a gray zone, too wild for the executive, too mature for the enthusiast, too scary for the family man, too unfamiliar for the wealthy. And for dealerships, it was a nightmare to sell. No one walked into a Vauxhall or Opel showroom expecting to be pitched a 177 mph Super Sedan Lotus. On their end, did what they always did, built the best car they could, regardless of mass market logic. But GM wasn't Lotus, and GM saw the numbers. Just 950 cars were built in total. Fewer than 300 stayed in the UK. The rest scattered across Europe, into the hands of collectors, speed freaks, and in more than a few cases, people with criminal records. The association stuck. For all its brilliance, the car had become a liability. There was no PR campaign strong enough to counter the tabloid damage. In corporate boardrooms, the decision became clear. Shut it down. There would be no Lotus Omega Mark II. No refreshed version. No slow refinement over time. It was too fast, too loud, too hard to control, in every way. And so, just 2 years after its launch, production ended. No ceremony, no swan song, no marketing spin. The car was quietly erased. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. It proved a car didn't need to scream to be dangerous, that engineering could break more rules than styling ever could, that the real threat wasn't a red Ferrari, but a green Vauxhall. This wasn't a failure of performance. It was a failure of permission. The world and GM simply wasn't ready for what they had created. And so the Lotus Omega became something rare. A car whose death wasn't due to weakness, but to strength. It wasn't underpowered. It wasn't overpriced. It was too capable, too real, too uncompromising. And that's what made it unacceptable. For all the power it gave the driver, it gave none to the system. It couldn't be branded easily. It couldn't be explained. It had to be removed. And that's exactly what happened. The fastest sedan in the world, gone without warning. But like all legends, it didn't die. It went underground. Into garages, into whispers, into myths. The kind of car you hear about from someone older, the kind of story you read in the margins of old magazines, the kind of machine that makes you question how far a company can go before it scares itself. They didn't cancel the Lotus Omega because it was bad. They canceled it because it was too good. And that's the most dangerous thing of all. When the production stopped, there was no press release, no farewell tour, no special edition to mark the end. The Lotus Omega just disappeared, but not from memory. For those who knew, who had driven it or seen it flash past on an empty motorway. The car became something more than rare. It became sacred. Not because of what it looked like, or even what it cost, but because of what it meant. This was a machine that broke rules, that ignored categories, that quietly shattered the idea of what a sedan could be, and what it should be. In the years that followed its demise, the world moved on. Performance sedans kept evolving. Horsepower increased, technology advanced, turbochargers became common, and top speeds climbed. But none of them felt like the Lotus Omega, because what made it special wasn't just speed, it was intent. The car wasn't designed to sell dreams. It wasn't chasing market trends. It wasn't sculpted by marketers, or safety committees, or design consultants. It was built by engineers who asked a simple question: what happens if we do this not because we're allowed to, but because we can? That spirit doesn't scale. It doesn't fit into annual growth targets or brand guidelines. It lives in the gaps between profit and obsession. And that's why the Lotus Omega stands alone. For a long time, it was forgotten. Too fast for its own good, too misunderstood to be mainstream. But as time passed, a quiet revival began. Collectors started searching. Forums kept stories alive. YouTube videos showcased survivors still pushing 170 miles per hour, decades after production. Mechanics learned the quirks. Owners whispered part numbers across continents. Because you couldn't just take a Lotus Omega to any garage. You needed someone who understood. The engine wasn't ordinary. The transmission came from a Corvette. The tires, custom-made, and now long out of production. Owning one became a kind of commitment to complexity, to history, to an idea. And slowly, prices began to rise, not because of hype, but because of scarcity. Because once people realized there were fewer than 1,000 in the world, and many had been wrecked, stolen, or lost, the value shifted. Not monetary value, symbolic value. This wasn't just a car anymore. It was a time capsule. A reminder of what happens when engineers are left alone, when corporations let madness live, when performance isn't styled or sanitized, just delivered. For some, the Lotus Omega is the ultimate cute car. Quiet, fast, unbelievable. For others, it's an engineering outlier. An example of what happens when the right people are given the wrong platform. But for everyone who knows the story, the car represents a question. Could this happen again? Could another major manufacturer greenlight something so extreme, so unapologetic, so unfiltered? Probably not. Today, cars are safer, smarter, more connected, but also more restricted. Every launch passes through layers of testing, forecasting, branding, global compliance. There's no more room for accidents of brilliance. The Lotus Omega was an accident, a beautiful one, a car born from overlap. GM's desire for prestige, Lotus's obsession with handling, Opel's solid, unsuspecting base, and a moment in time when no one said no. It happened once. And that's why it matters. Because in a world obsessed with progress, it's easy to forget that not all innovation survives. Some machines are too sharp, too pure, too fast to last. They arrive like sparks and vanish before the world can explain them. Today, the Lotus Omega lives in garages with velvet ropes. It sits under covers, next to legends. Its value keeps climbing. Not because of fame, but because of those who still remember. They remember the sound, the way the turbos spooled quietly, the way the gearbox shifted with unexpected force, the way the badge said Lotus, not to impress, but to warn. They remember what it felt like to drive something that didn't care what others thought, that didn't need to prove itself, because it already had. And maybe that's the real legacy. The Lotus Omega wasn't designed to be loved, it was designed to perform, and in doing so, it became unforgettable. Not because it stayed in production, but because it couldn't. Because it wasn't built to last. It was built to matter. It didn't look like a threat. It had 4 doors, a quiet badge, and a shape that disappeared into traffic. It wasn't red. It didn't shout. It didn't need to. And yet, for a brief moment in history, it was the fastest, most powerful, most controversial sedan on Earth. Built not for comfort, not for luxury. Built because a few engineers asked, what if we just didn't hold back? The Lotus Omega was never meant to be a bestseller. It wasn't safe, politically or publicly. It challenged law enforcement. It embarrassed you. It made people uncomfortable. And then, just like that, it was gone. No marketing plan could have predicted what it became. No PR team could contain what it represented. Because it wasn't just a car, it was a message. That performance doesn't ask for permission. That innovation sometimes arrives uninvited. That legends don't need to last, to leave a mark. Today, you'll rarely see one on the road. Most people have never even heard of it, but in quiet corners of the car world, in late-night forums, in conversations that begin with, "Did you ever hear about?" the name still echoes. Lotus Omega, the fastest sedan they had to shut down, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. If you've made it this far, you're not just watching a car story, you're part of something deeper, the quiet resistance to ordinary. And if you believe these stories matter, of machines that defied the system, and engineers who built with no compromise, like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, because the algorithm forgets, but we don't have to. Some cars aren't just fast, they're unforgettable. Thanks for watching.